Tuia ki tēnā pūrongo, nā wai I kino kino keake. Koira tā ngā mātanga haura a Hinengaro Māori, mō ngā taumahatanga kua pā ki ngā whānau I tēnei te wiki tua toru o te noho taratahi. A hei whakakoorero I tēnei kaupapa ko hono mai te uri o te arawa, a Michael Ngaira mātanga ma te Hinengaro mō ngā iwi taketake o te ao. E te tuakana e mai tēnā koe I whaiwahi mai ki a mātou o Aukaha. Pātai tuatahi ki a koe e te rangatira. Kei te pēhea koe I tēnei noho taratahi. How's your lockdown been and have you been fielding a number of calls for assistance during this time?
Tēnā koe e te tūngane. Ai, tēnā pai rau atu taku moho ao, taku taratahi. Ai, I te rātau ko au, ko taku hoa rangatira e no moho ao. I tēnei moho ao, ko tai mai ngā whānau katoa e whakakiki ana tō mātou whare e tū ake nei. Nō reira e pai ana, pai raua tō mātou whare e tū ake rā.
Nō reira, pēhea e tahi atu whānau I hoa, you're an expert in the art of, in the field of Indigenous mental health. How are our whānau doing out there 3 weeks into this lockdown?
Yeah. I've fielded quite a few calls from some of our whānau throughout the country, asking for assistance regarding getting into mental health services. You know, what's the pathway for them to access those services? And what I'm finding is that it's really difficult at the moment, specifically talking to my mates who are from the psychiatric units, who are working in addictions, who said that they're struggling to cope with the demands of our whānau ringing in. So I guess my job is to ensure that our whānau make it to those services and to make sure that our services are working with our whānau when they come in.
Now, we saw in the story earlier that a lot of our whānau who would normally rely a lot on the kaian schools and all of that to help pop up their budget each week in whāngai, the tamariki now that they don't have that assistance and having to deal with the kids at home every day. Some of these whānau have 14 bodies in the whare. What sort of pressure and struggle does that put on the mental health of a māma or a papa or both at home during this time?
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum, there's a continuum, and at the moment the mental health messages or the health promotion messages are targeting our whānau who are doing well, who are just coping with day-to-day stresses or anxiety about wanting to get out of lockdown so they can return to work. But what I want to focus on is our whānau that we're already in poverty. And we got to remember that before lockdown, over 200,000 children were in poverty, and 55,000 of those were Māori children. And now that we're going through a lockdown, there are huge compounding issues that are impacting on our children and on our whānau. And kai is one of those things that we need to have as a necessity. So our whānau will think about kai, think about how they're going to pay the power, think about how they're going to get housing before they actually think about the messages that have been put out nationwide. So I think we need to have a bit of compassion around our whānau that are experiencing these huge stresses in their whānau, just to cope with the day-to-day things of maintaining the key message of a team of 5 million.
And now back home here in Rotorua, a 27-year-old wahine has been charged with murder following the death of a child here in Rotorua. Now, we can't talk about the case as it's before the court, but, I mean, that is a sign of the stresses and the hardships that some of our whānau are already facing. What's your experience and knowledge with the level of stress that our whānau are experiencing?
Yeah, so there's levels of stress, and I mentioned it earlier in my koorero. There's the anxiety of wishing that this was all over and I can go to work, I can go meet up with my mates, I can go and have coffee and do all those things. So those are the normal stressors that are going on and dealing with the day-to-day stuff. But there's the other stressors that are unsaid and unheard, and that's when you move past the level of control and you move into the area of being really red about things, really angry about things, and there's no point of return. So, for example, our whānau may have experienced things like not having formula in the cupboard to feed our baby, not having kai on the table to feed our babies, and the constant crying that's occurring. And all you want to do is to ensure that our baby is silenced. And this is the only way that you can do it, through that breaking point. So I'm not saying that this is what happened in that home, but I just know that a lot of whānaus go to that red point. And so you end up arguing on the streets and having domestics on the streets, or actually physically punching someone, or you actually move to the stage of really harming someone, and that's moving into the state of murder, or really taking someone's life, or taking your own life. And these are the things that I believe that haven't been really talked about lately. And I don't think that there's been strategies to actually look at these things, to actually take care of our whānau that are at that extreme end of the spectrum. And, handing out a pamphlet to say these are the services is probably surface things for me. I think we need on-the-ground services working in our communities, working together with them to make sure they're all right.
And speaking of suicide, that's an issue that is very prevalent during this lockdown. A lot of our whānau in Rotorua, but also in Auckland, are experiencing it. How bad is it?
It's I can only speak anecdotally, and we got to also understand that these sudden deaths are before the coroner at the moment. But I've received urgent or crisis calls from whānau throughout the country, saying that they've been struggling with the death of loved ones during this time to suicide. So I've been helping to firstly console them and to move them through the process of the tangihanga process, and to also look at ways and strategies to look after them. But this tells me, Kereama, that our whānau are struggling. Our whānau are struggling with the lockdown. Our whānau are struggling in isolation. And whilst it's suicide, our whānau are also struggling with self-harm and suicide attempts. Now, these are all the whānau that have been contacting me during this time.
E taku rangatira, Michael Ngaira, tēnā koe wēnei kōrero, and thank you very much for the mahi that you do looking after our whānau there on the ground who are really struggling with this type of kaupapa. Ngā mihi nui ki a koe, taku rangatira.
Tēnā koe oa, tēnā koe tau katoa.
Aukaha te taipū kōrero.